Well, I'd like to start, ladies and gentlemen, by thanking the Director General of the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy for inviting me to speak to you this afternoon. Today is a special day because it is also the International Day for Women. So I'd like to congratulate all the women who are here for your special day. I'm sure that you will all have a great later hours after this particular session. I'd like to start about tourism. Tourism, ladies and gentlemen, is one of the growing engines of economic development all around the world. At the opening ceremony of the ITB, the mayor of Berlin was telling us how year on year there is an increase in tourist arrivals in Berlin. And this is the story all over the world. As of last week, the amount of money generated through tourism was 1.5 trillion US dollars. That's incredible. And it is very likely that in the next couple of years, the number of tourists, outbound tourists from countries, will exceed 2 billion. That's amazing. And it is amazing, but it is also very important for the world economy. It is very important for us in Mauritius because we are far removed from major land areas, and we need to have tourists because we, as a small island developing state, we don't have any oil, we don't have any gas, we don't have any minerals, and we depend for our economic welfare on the ingenuity of our people and also on our human capital. Tourism has challenges. I'm not going to speak to you about what tourism brings to the economy of Mauritius, but it is a very important pillar of the economy. It generates a lot of foreign exchange. It creates a lot of employment. But for me today, I'd like to address you on what tourism can do for the world in terms of understanding, in terms of peace and security. When Donald Trump became president of the United States, he started by saying that he has to build a wall. And that was part of his political manifesto. It is his right. But tourism doesn't believe in building walls. Tourism believes in building bridges, creating the environment for people of different cultures and different regions to come together and to know how the other world lives. This is what makes tourism so important. And this is why we speak of sustainable tourism. Sustainability is key for the continued growth of tourism. And when we speak of tourism as being a sustainable activity, we need also to understand that, like all human activities, there is a downside to tourism. And the downside, of course, is the carbon footprint. And I'm very happy that somebody in the audience raised the issue of climate change when the ambassador was speaking. Climate change is a challenge for the whole world. But it is an even more of a challenge for island nations. Most of the island nations that are building tourism as an economic activity happen to be in what I call the cyclone belt. You must remember a couple of years ago in the Caribbean, so many islands got destroyed because of cyclones. Mauritius is also in the cyclone belt, and we are vulnerable. So when you speak of sustainability in tourism, we must not be blinded by the vulnerable nature of what tourism is all about. When I speak of tourism being vulnerable, it is climate change, extreme weather conditions, flash floods, or drought. A couple of weeks ago, Australia itself, as a developed country, experienced the ravages of extreme weather conditions. Many people died. And you could have, and I'm sure you know, that there were snakes coming out of the toilets in Australia and crocodiles in the living rooms of people. So these are the challenges that we have to face. How do we address climate change? We in Mauritius are taking lots of measures, as the ambassador said, in making sure that no hotel development takes place without our being sure that there is an environment impact assessment that is carried out. And if the environment impact assessment is not favorable, then that project doesn't get going. We also are vulnerable to coastal erosion, and we are rehabilitating all the coasts that have been degraded. We have a program for planting corals so that nature doesn't suffer as a result of human activity. It is important for us to maintain nature in its pristine condition, because that is all that we have to leave for generations that will come after us. And it is given to us on trust. And it is our duty as trustees to make sure that nature doesn't get degraded. But of course, there will be a downside to any activity. There will be negative impact. But it is our duty as decision makers to mitigate whatever degradation there is, and to make sure that we undo all the damage that is done to the environment. All this can happen only if we believe in what I call sustainability in tourism. We as a country, we want tourism to be there for us forever. Tourism is one of those activities that celebrates what I call people-to-people diplomacy. And I'm happy that I'm talking about this in this center of cultural diplomacy. This people-to-people diplomacy is very important for understanding among people, as I said earlier. But we have threats to tourism. The greatest threat is the threat to security. Terrorism is something that we have to live with on a daily basis when you are a tourist destination. You will recall a couple of years ago, there were photos, images of the white sand in Tunisia with blood because people had been gunned down on the Tunis coast. And tourism in Tunisia did not recover for 5 years after that. So one incident can destroy the whole industry. This is why security, without security you can have no tourism. And tourism and terrorism can never coexist. Security for us is very important. But when we talk of security, when we talk about tourism, we must also be conscious of the fact that there are human rights. We want tourism not to be in conflict with human rights. So when we are dealing with tourism, we have to create an environment where people are free to travel, because tourism must be for everybody. With the economic growth in the world, with income rising all over the world, people must be able to travel. There are, of course, in China and India, there are two superpowers for tourism. And we believe that this tourism activity is something that is a force for good, because it alleviates poverty. A tourist, let's say from Germany going to a destination in the Caribbean, is creating a job, is improving the quality of life for the people there. So it is a force for good. So tourism is for everybody, but tourism also has to be affordable. And for it to be affordable, we must have air access. Without air access, countries like in the Caribbean, maybe not so much in the Caribbean because they have cruises from the United States and Canada. But for countries in the South Pacific, in the Indian Ocean, without air access, there can be no tourism as an activity, as an industry. The hospitality industry depends upon this air access. But again, climate change. When we talk of air access, getting millions of tourists to travel, the talk is about carbon footprint. The carbon footprint of a tourist traveling, let's say, 10, 12 hours to go to a destination is very high. And when it is high, then the destination has to take measures to mitigate that carbon footprint. And we are doing everything we can to mitigate that carbon footprint. It may not be the best mitigation that we have, but at least we are conscious of the need for mitigation of the carbon footprint. I said tourism must be for all. But when we say tourism must be for all, we must also be conscious of the fact that no tourist will go to a place where there are health hazards. You will remember some years back, there was Ebola in West Africa. No tourist would go to a place where there is an epidemic like Ebola. So health surveillance also is critical for a successful tourism industry. Tourism is also good for the protection of historical sites. Countries that don't have the resources have seen many of their historical sites being degraded and not being maintained properly. But when there is tourism, when tourists will visit those sites, tourists bring revenue, and it is possible then for countries to take measures to look after their historical sites and to make sure that all the sites are maintained properly. Let me say something about tourism. Tourism, I said, is for all. I was in India recently. And we were having an exchange like this. And the ladies in the audience asked a question. Is it safe for a lady to travel alone to Mauritius? Because you know that in India, there are lots of problems with respect to single ladies, and there have been very tragic situations on buses in New Delhi. So I said, Mauritius is a very safe place. People can come in families, alone, whether man or woman. We are a free country. We don't have visa requirements for many countries. And this is why I was a bit surprised when that lady in New Delhi asked me that question. But for that particular lady, traveling alone to a destination is a risky business. So we must, as a destination, as an actor in the tourism industry, give that assurance to everybody that the tourist who comes to a destination like Mauritius will be able to travel back safe and sound to his or her home country. At the opening ceremony of ITB on Tuesday night, the mayor of Berlin was talking about how in Berlin everybody is free, the LGBT crowd is free to do whatever they want to do. Everybody goes about his or her business without any hassle on freedom. And immediately after he had spoken, the minister from Malaysia took the floor. And although he didn't refer to it as the LGBT problem, but it was evident when he said that tourists can come to his country, but there are laws to be observed. So there are restrictions in some countries about, let's say, LGBT. We don't have those restrictions because we believe in people being free and following their natural inclinations and their sexual orientations. That's their personal life. It's not for the state to get into that kind of a situation. I don't know how long we have, but let me say a few other things. 5 more minutes? All right, 5 more minutes. Because there's a lady at the back who's making sure that I don't exceed the 5 minutes. But let me rush through a few other things which I consider important for you to understand the tourism industry. I mentioned challenges, but there are also opportunities. But the other challenge is over-tourism. I'm sure you must have heard of over-tourism. What is the level of tourism that a city like Berlin can accommodate on a year-on-year basis? But there are other places, like Barcelona, like Venice, where there are serious problems, where people are not responding to the presence of large numbers of tourists in their cities over the summer. How do we deal with that? When we say that everybody is free to travel, can we also say that we are going to limit the numbers of people going to a particular destination? Over-tourism is a problem. In Amsterdam as well, there are problems about the number of tourists. But then this is the beauty about tourism. When a place is fashionable, everybody wants to go there. And when everybody wants to go there, the local people don't want those people to come. So we say that in Mauritius, we are a small country. And we need to have a level beyond which I don't think we can go, because we will have the local population not happy. And for tourism to succeed, there must be that inclusive element in tourism. If the local people are not involved, they are not engaged with what is happening in the tourism industry, then tourism will fail. We must have their full support and collaboration for a successful tourism industry. My philosophy is to ensure that we engage the local communities in a variety of ways that tourism can provide, in entertainment, in farming, in fishing, in preserving the culture, the music, painting, art, getting them jobs in the hotel industry, landscaping, because the hotel industry can cater for skilled and non-skilled jobs. So the whole gamut of jobs is possible. And when the local people are involved, then not only will they protect the industry, but they will defend it as well. And this is why I believe that the SDGs can be realized through tourism. We can really make poverty history through tourism. We can also get tourism to get to a situation where no one is left behind. And this is what my message is today, because I believe that tourism has become invaluable to many countries. Tourism is here to stay. We must get people to accept tourism. We must get people to understand that tourism can really bring understanding among people of different faiths and cultures. And tourism, as I said earlier, can really be a force for good. Of course, there will be challenges. Of course, there will be difficulties. But as long as we are concerned about opening up to the world and getting the world to come and see how everybody lives, because today with air access, there are lots and lots of regions that were inaccessible in the past have become accessible. So let us give tourism a chance. And I'm very happy that I have been given this opportunity to share with you this particular insight from my point of view on tourism. Of course, there will be problems, trade wars between China and the US. In fact, as a result of that particular situation, many Chinese who had planned to go to the US have canceled their flights, have not gone on holiday. But these are, in my view, accidents. But tourism as an industry is sustainable. We have to make sure that it is responsible tourism, inclusive tourism, ethical tourism, and people-to-people friendly tourism. As long as the environment is taken care of, tourism has a bright future. Thank you very much. That's what tourism is all about. Forget everything.
Yes, okay. So there's no, you don't have any land borders with any countries, but the other countries in the region, like the Seychelles and the Comoros Islands, like I was checking out some statistics, and Mauritius has way more tourists than both of the other countries even combined. So what do you think, in your opinion, what has your country done correct? Like what has your country done better than your other two island neighbors to bring in more tourists to your country? What would you recommend for your two neighbors?
Well, we are competitors, first of all, with the Seychelles. The Seychelles is much smaller than Mauritius. We are small, but Seychelles is even smaller. But they are an archipelago, so they have lots of islands, they have lots of diversity, but they have an inherent problem regarding the environment for development of tourist accommodation, for example. And this is something I did not touch on, but I have touched on it in other fora. If you go, I don't know whether you know the Seychelles. If you go to the Seychelles, you need to have a setback from the beach, the high water mark, and then from the mountains. And if you observe the international norms, there is no room for development because it is so narrow. So they have had to adapt their conditions for hotel development. But they do it in a very environment-friendly way. Why we are better? Because we are bigger. I'm sure we have much better accommodation than they do. We are a much more diverse country. We have, in fact, Mauritius, as I like to say, is a United Nations in miniature. We have people from all over the world living in a small place in harmony. In fact, we are a very example of diversity in terms of religion, cultures, languages, cuisine. So we are. I think you must come and pay us a visit. I'm sure you'll be happy. The Comoros doesn't really have a tourism industry. They are trying to build one, but it's going to take a long time because it costs money to build a luxury resort. It costs a lot of money. Investors will not go into a country unless they have security, unless they have the assurance that the ecosystem for governance is there for them to be able to bring tourists, visas, everything. Everything is a package. And I think we have been able to do it better than the Seychelles. We have also a national carrier, which is doing relatively well. But our major challenge, which we didn't mention, is the Maldives. They came to learn from us, tourism, and they're much better. But you like sharing. Tourism is about sharing. Okay, I think my time is up. Thank you.